Welcome to Native Calgarian and Mossy for listening. I'm your host, Michelle Robinson, speaking to you in Mohkinstsis in the Blackfoot Confederacy, home of the Niitsitapi, Tsuut'ina Dene, and the Yiharhi Nakota. I talk about history, current news, unheard news, book clubs, with special guests to give local or national issues a voice through an urban Satu Dene lens. My life's work will be to honor the voices of my ancestors and next generation with humor, love, and truth. Reconciliation is work, not performance. May we honor all Indigenous voices with that courage. Today is February 6, 2025. Welcome to Native Calgarian. If you enjoy listening to Indigenous content by this Satu Dene woman, my Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, all of the donors who have ever showed your support. I cannot thank you enough. But if you cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. But no, I will absolutely razz you if they're bad ones. Giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening from. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe and see my guest's beautiful face. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And remember to always share the things you learned to your network. Okay, nagana go meko cheche stokomaki nara dago de kots nagot tene siku saradi. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use they, them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake Tribe in Treaty 11 in Delaney. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is uninvited to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences in colonial spaces. My late great-grandfather is Milo B. Wool from Delaney. His daughter, Alice, is now my late granny. My mother and I are Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act and Post status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution. Having a Canadian Indian Act and Post status card is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two-Spirit, or the Indigenous to us LGBTQ community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. I'm not a social worker, nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous people. I just share my journey as a Dene mom navigating this ableist, colonial, racist, misogynistic world in 2025. As I hope you are all thinking, we need to all honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this so-called country named Canada. I hope everyone sees their role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Land back is a movement that could save the planet from created by colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. As a former geomatics drafter, I'd be happy to teach you more, but you'll have to pay me. Go to nativecalgarian.com for more. So today I'm happy to have my friend. I'm lucky enough to call my friend. I've gotten to know Robert over the years. And Robert, would you like to introduce yourself in your way?
Hey, me nime como contactancy, taniata wapaptico kota uske benecio. I'm Robert-Falcon Ouellette. I'm Earth Thunderbird, and I'm from Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan, the Eagle Hills, and that's Treaty 6 territory. Actually, I was with my students last night, and we were looking at all the treaty maps across the country in education, and we were studying education, and I was looking at Treaty 11, and the students were rather surprised to know that there were so many treaties that were signed, and they were all numbered. And so that was kind of cool to think, oh, Treaty 6, Treaty 1. I live in Treaty 1 right now on the homeland of the Anishinaabe, Neho, Dene peoples, Métis Nation. And there's also lots of Inuit here in Manitoba, a big mixture of Indigenous peoples.
Massive. Yeah, I know we've all been kind of migrating and forced to out of like a million reasons from education, healthcare.
Economics.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's all there. So, well, it's great to have you today. I had to message you last week because I had seen you in the news, and I think this is wonderful because I've been here in Calgary trying to do this work with the Calgary Police for like 10 years, and I've since cut ties. We're not having anything to do with each other anymore because we were trying to indigenize, trying to do the reconciliation and talk about changes that we can make in order to help Indigenous people. And man, it was a real struggle to try to get smudge in Mawata Armories where the Calgary Police do their parade. But finally it got done. Now that I left, I don't know if it'll continue, but regardless, I just know how hard that process was. When I seen you in the news for what I seen you in the news for, you are the new chaplain for the Canadian military. And I'd love to have you tell us about that and tell us about that journey and just say
Yeah.
congratulations.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been
Yeah.
actually a very long journey. So I'm actually the first Indigenous Knowledge Keeper chaplain in the forces, and means I'm a captain. I'm also been in the forces of the Army for about 29 years. So, we know each other through politics. Used to be a member of Parliament, but I was also still in the reserves at that time, and I still am today. So I work at the University of Ottawa, and so this has been a process where the first time I made an application, I've sent in a memo. I was talking with a padre at the Valcartier military base in Quebec City about 15 years ago. And he said, "Oh, you're finishing your PhD in Indigenous spirituality. Hmm. We need an Indigenous chaplain. You should write a memo and we should put it up and see what happens." And I was like, "Oh, sure." And then I was talking. I thought about it, and then I met a young soldier, and he had long hair. He was in the Van Deus. I was in the field ambulance, which is a medical unit. I was a sergeant, and the young man actually they had gave him a nickname. They called him Pocahontas.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good nickname. So I said, you know what? There is a need for someone to be supportive of others. So I actually sent in the memo, and I didn't hear back from anyone. No one responded. It was like a dead letter. You send it off, and
Yeah.
no one gets back to you.
Yeah.
And it sat there for a number of years, and then I was at the University of Manitoba working, and then I was elected to MP.
Hmm.
And then while I was an MP, actually, there was this terrible situation that happened in 2017. There was a young soldier, Nolan Caribou, that committed suicide on a training mission with the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, an infantry unit, reserve unit.
Hmm.
And he's First Nations. And because it was my area, I went to the funeral and offered my condolences to the family. And I was down at the Minto Armories here.
Hmm.
And I remember it just, being a very sad situation. And there's a lot that came out afterwards. He was suffering harassment. There was a fight club in the unit. It was a very toxic
Oh
environment.
no.
And he had committed suicide on the training exercise because of the harassment.
Hmm.
And uh, and and so for me, I was actually, I was quite upset about it. I think a lot of soldiers were upset. There was a huge change in the unit. There was an investigation, change in leadership, and trying to do things in a much better way. But after I was no longer MP in 2019, I had this opportunity of perhaps changing units, and called up the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, and one of their officers there, and said I'd like to come work there as a reservist.
Yeah.
And because I was in the Naval Reserves, and they said, of course, we'd love to have you. Uh, they were very happy to have me, and
That's
so
great.
I transferred over. And then I wasn't sure how they would take to me. I do have long hair, and I don't know hide who I am. But I think also because I was a former MP, that gives me some protection. And so I asked them why I went, created a memo, and I said I'd like to have a drum group with some of the Indigenous soldiers. There's actually a large number of Indigenous soldiers. I think around 10% of the unit's actually Indigenous,
Hmm.
which is far above the average in the Canadian Forces, which is around 2.7%.
Hmm.
And so, the unit because I was Robert, they didn't say no. And then became it was during the pandemic, so it was a little difficult. So I actually had the soldiers come to my place. We had a teepee outside, and we would meet outside in our Arctic gear, and once a week, and I'd had some drums, and we would drum and we would sing, and in the snow, sometimes in the teepee, depending on how we're all feeling,
Yeah.
and it was really great. And we started around with about 9, 10 soldiers who wanted to participate, and people were really excited. And it built up over time, and it's still going strong about 4 years later, this drum group. In fact, actually, the soldiers, some have progressed on, some are on missions, they're overseas serving the Canadian Forces. They still have their drum that I gifted them each. When they participated a few days or a few sessions, I said, this is for you.
Mm.
And people were very happy. There was one soldier that was so happy to have his drum. Every time he'd go on an exercise, the drum would be with him in his bag as part of his gear. So it was very exciting. And we sing traditional songs, we do ceremony, and we actually just go around in a circle and we just talk about what's going on in our lives,
Yeah.
positive, negative,
Yep.
and but also positive. And we just say a quick prayer. It's not too elaborate, but it's just we just spend time supporting each other, and some of them have been really great supports for each other.
Hmm.
There was one young soldier that had aged out of care, CFS, and he had joined the Raven program, or the Bold Eagle program, which is kind of a summer training program for Indigenous youth. And he joined, and he couldn't live where he was living anymore, so he was on his own. And I call him up and I see how he's doing, and he's like, well, I'm not doing too well. I have no heating in my apartment. I can't afford the heat. I can't afford this. I can't afford that. So some of the guys and ladies showed up with extension cords, ran them into the hallway of the apartment building, and got some space heaters to make sure he had something to warm his apartment with. And then we got him a job full time for a few months, so we could actually. And off he went on an exercise actually.
Yeah.
Traveling around up north, and they really loved it. And he's still in the unit today. He's actually he's a corporal now. He's no longer a private, and he's doing very, very well. And so that's been the importance. Now, I know that's a long story to get where you want to get to, but what happened was, um, uh, I was at I I was in the unit, and I was helping an elder. I have a friend who's an elder, and his wife was an elder as well at a local college. And she's nearing the age of retirement for the forces, but she had put in an application to join as a chaplain. And I'm a little bit younger, but I went, she came to me and said, "Can you help train me?" So a number of times we got together and we did some, workouts, and we did the physical test, because I'm also certified to test on the force test for the physical fitness test. And unfortunately, she had some difficulty, and she had to continue working on it. And so I started talking with the chaplains about this, and there were some other issues obtaining drums. My unit could never seem to do the procurement to pay for the drums. I always had to pay for it out of my own pocket to gift the soldiers the drums. They're about $200 each, because I
And
can't
that's
always
a
make
good
them.
price. I mean, like some of them can be up to 400. Yeah,
Yeah,
I get
yeah.
it.
Yeah. So, anyways, so I'd been dealing with the chaplains, and I was talking a little bit about this, and then someone suggested you should put your application in too. And so I did. And I didn't hear anything from him. But then they called me up and said I'm in charge of recruitment. It was a very nice Christian chaplain, Lutheran, and we got together at the 17 wing in the Air Force headquarter building, 1 CAD, Canadian Air Division, and we chatted for a couple hours, and then I didn't hear anything from him. And then a few months later, I got this call from this chaplain in Ottawa, Major Carter, Brett Carter. And I was like, well, what would you like? Well, we got your application, your memo that you'd like to join, become a chaplain, an Indigenous Knowledge Keeper chaplain, or Indigenous chaplain. How do we, what's your education? we started talking. I said, well, and he said, do you have a master's degree in divinity? Well, I don't have a master's degree in divinity, but I do have a PhD in anthropology with a specialization on indigenous spirituality. Oh, well, this is easy then. We could check that box because that's the problem you said with everyone else is everyone needs to get this education because that's the standard we have in the forces.
Yeah.
So you've checked the box. And so he said to me, well, I'm actually a Muslim and I'm a imam in the forces, and I'm also a minority, and I'm going to help you out. I'm in charge of the rules and the regulations for recruitment. So I'm going to make sure this gets done. We're not going to change the rules and regulations. We're just going to make sure that we check all the boxes in a way that fits what you want to do, what I want to do, and what the Canadian Forces needs and what our soldiers need.
Yeah.
And over the course of 18 months, we spent time checking boxes up and down, up and down. And eventually, even, at some point they came along and they said, about 6, 7 months ago, they said, well, what's the title you would like? Are you going to be an elder? And I said, well, I'm a little bit young, maybe to be an elder. I do know a lot about indigenous spiritual practices, and I've a Sundance, and I've been training under elders for decades now,
Yeah.
different ones. I said, well, how about Indigenous Knowledge Keeper? They're like, oh, that we like that, Gardien de Savoir in French. And so off to the races. And after 18 months, last Thursday, I was sworn in and given a commission in the Canadian Forces, promoted from warrant officer to captain as the first Indigenous Knowledge Keeper chaplain
Yeah.
in Canadian history.
Congratulations.
This is exciting because people forget,
Hmm.
Canadians forget that this was illegal under the Indian Act.
Yeah.
This was against the law in Canada.
Yeah.
You could not have someone do indigenous spiritual practices. They could go to jail. You could lose your children.
Yeah.
You would have your children sent to residential school. This was highly prohibited, and the institutions like the military, the RCMP, were there to enforce those rules and to make sure that you did not do those things. And so for me, it was quite I was, it was emotional actually. It was coming full circle. This idea of having full acceptance, and the soldiers. There's actually a photo. There's about 8 of us actually drumming, 9 of us drumming in the drum group. We all have hand drums. We don't do a big drum. We do the hand drums. So because it's easier to for someone if you have an exercise and you have one person or something, you don't need 4 people to actually do it. You can just have one person go on their own to offer honor songs and prayer songs. So anyways, it was very exciting. And I was very happy. And I had an elder, Dr. Winston Watani, who's well known in many Indigenous communities. He was there to offer prayers and guide the smudge. And I had the brigade commander and also Joel Pedersen, who's our chief warrant officer of the brigade, who's also the first Indigenous brigade sergeant major in
Awesome.
Canadian history.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. It's very exciting.
Well, I'm really happy to hear this because, like, as I explained to you, like, just something so simple about policies and procedures, just not integrating Indigenous ways, ironically, as treaty partners. So, to me, I think the importance of you not just being the first to do it, but realizing, like, there's so much work to do. As we have always said, you and I've been a part of a team that have always said there's so much work to do.
There is a lot of work to do, and it's actually, even within the group now, I'm actually transferred from my old unit, the Rifles, where we have the Indigenous drum group. I'm going to the Fort Garry Horse, which is the armored unit, a reconnaissance, and they also have soldiers, and we'll be forming a group there as well. So that'll be the second group in the Canadian Forces. Actually, the third. At the 17 wing, I have some friends that they have actually formed under Sergeant Brett Thompson, sorry, a drum group there, and I was helping out with that as well. So it'll be the third group within the forces, offering, just a place to actually support each other.
Yep.
It's not just about the drumming, it's not about the singing. It's important, but it's actually just about, spending time together and sharing experiences, positive and negative,
Yep.
and just making sure that when you get up in the morning, you know why you're doing it.
Yep. And knowing that you have a community within a community
Yeah, of
that
course.
respect what you're doing. So I just think it's so incredible. I just remember being in cadets in like 90 in the 90s and not, being allowed to have long hair, not being allowed to wear
Mm.
makeup, blah, 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 blah. And it just, I was really colonized at the time, so I didn't
Mm.
really care. But obviously, in my adult life, all I've had is confliction about, being in two worlds and not understanding that and trying to unpack it my entire adulthood. So um, I'm just happy in the armed forces now to hear
Well,
that.
actually,
Yeah,
right now there's actually a court case moving its way through the court system, and they've come to an agreement. It's actually on racism against Black, Indigenous, and other people of racial minorities within the forces, and I think it's a class action lawsuit. I don't know your experience how well it was in cadets, but when I joined the military, I had a commanding officer. The first time I presented myself as Corporal Ouellette in the Van Dues, he said, "There's three things we don't like in the regiment. We don't like Anglophones, we don't like women, and we don't like Indians." And get that bang 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 out of my office, and I was dismissed, and I was like, wow, like that's a fun welcome to be welcomed into a beautiful supposed to be like a camaraderie and ethos. So, this is what they teach you on basic training, and you arrive in the unit, it's completely different.
hmm
But then sometimes I forget that the unit I was posted to had been at Oka. They were the Van Dues who were fighting Indigenous peoples. And so they didn't see Indigenous peoples as being fully Canadian. They saw them as being almost the enemy.
yeah,
And it's been a long process. Like when I started after a number of years in the military, I decided to grow my hair because it was permitted because of the work of Stanley Prince, who's in the Navy back in the early 90s. I started growing my hair, and I had the coxswain of my naval unit actually, he said some not some nice things, and then I went to see the harassment advisor, who was the chaplain, actually say, I agree with the coxswain. I don't agree with what you're doing. I think it's a terrible thing. And I was like, wow, if I have a complaint to make about harassment, you're the person who's supposed to welcome me and help me out, and yet you're harassing me.
yeah, yeah. I know. And so in the
And I'm
early,
actually I'm actually also like septicizing the words I'm using.
yeah.
Usually I'm not swearing on your show. So
You'd be welcome to, but I respectfully understand, just trying not to. But yes, I
not
wouldn't
all
be
Canadians are
upset.
like that. It's just
Yeah.
that sometimes you get some people who I don't know for whatever reason it wasn't a fun welcome.
Yep.
But the things are changing, and I think people actually, after the ceremony was over, I actually had a number of soldiers who were non-Indigenous. That was because it was witnessed by about 100 and, odd soldiers who were in the unit and in for the training night. I had some come up afterwards and they shook my hand and they said, I was just, for me, it was a real pleasure to be able to witness that and participate. I wasn't there to sing. I wasn't there to do any of the participate in the ceremony, but I participated in watching and just being a witness. And I'm very proud to be a member of the forces, and we have this today.
hmm
So, the forces are changing, and
Yeah.
that's a good thing. I
Yeah.
have two sons who are now in the Navy. One's a cook and one's a maritime technician, and one's in Victoria and one's in Quebec now or something, being cooking away on the base there. Uh, but so it's still it's actually quite exciting. And I want to leave you with a tidbit
Mm.
or just a thought. For your reconciliation is not just about the non-Indigenous population or the Canadian government. It's actually also about Indigenous peoples having
Yes.
reconciliation. So the
Yes.
unit that I'm in right now, that I was in, was the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, and the unit I'm going to is the Fort Garry Horse. In 1885, both these units fought Indigenous peoples in the Northwest.
Mm.
And they stood around Batoche. In fact, actually, they fought against my own family. My family was at Batoche.
Yeah.
I have both on the Métis side as well as the First Nations side. Afterwards they hung and 9 members of my reserve in the largest mass hanging in Canadian history.
Yeah. And they
Uh,
made residential school kids watch. Yeah.
yeah. So for me, yeah, in Battleford, yeah. So at Fort Battleford, so it was for me actually. It's I've also made an act of reconciliation as I'm in these 2 units and I'm trying to make a difference in my own little way, just participating,
Yeah.
witnessing, and helping out. And it's
Yeah.
not actually also just for Indigenous soldiers. My work is actually also supposed to be with all soldiers. So
Yeah.
anyone,
I do find I'm pretty guarded when it comes to giving non-Indigenous our information, especially from very privileged folks who want to misuse it in like an academia sense. But the
mm,
truth is on the ground when we're on the ground. I do a lot of work with, especially with white queers,
mm,
because they are so, isolated and don't believe in contemporary Canadian, Christian values, et cetera, et cetera, because they've been on the receiving end of them as we have at times. So,
yeah,
for me, it is really important for actual folks who are looking for real spirituality. Our ancestors, I believe, because I look through a lens of treaty, that they were kind. And I find our people are still so kind that to the point to a fault almost
yeah.
that, we always share with people who are hurting and help them. And teaching is just part of our way. And so I think it's important that we always are open, but we just have to be careful about exploitation. But obviously, as you know, there are a lot of folks who are not there to exploit. They are there with good faith, in good
Mm.
faith, and we are there in good faith, and we help each other. So I appreciate that, and I think that it's important because I'll never forget, as you know, in in cadets at that time in the early 90s, they had basically church day. Sunday was church day. And so you had a
Church
choice.
parade. It was
Yeah,
church parade.
you
You
could
had two
either,
choices.
yeah, you could go to a Catholic or go to a different Christian one. And then if you didn't believe in either, then you got to be a cleaning staff. So like the first time I was like, okay, well, I'll take some cleaning duty because I don't want to be a part of this. And then I was doing it thinking, why am I doing this? So then I just sat through stupid, words and ceremonies that didn't make any sense to me. And I watched my, colleagues obviously have some sort of spiritual feeling to that. And I was like, oh boy, I don't know if I belong here. So I really struggled with the Sundays specifically because
I did
there
that
was,
at Quadra actually.
yeah, that's exactly where mine was at Quadra. I always wonder if we really knew each other then.
What years were you there?
I was there from 90 to 92. So
Oh
so
yeah.
those three
I was in
years.
92, yeah.
Yeah, I
I
was
started in
in
92.
gunnery in 92. I took the 2 weekie in 90.
Hmm.
Yeah. What did you do at 92?
Music,
Oh,
band.
yes. Yeah, and band was a little different from Quadra because you guys ended up doing like the music teachings and such in a different place, and it seemed like,
Yeah, we went to the school. They had a
yeah,
school and we'd sit in the air conditioning and
I
play
know.
music. We
And I
love the
was
air conditioning.
Well, at in my regular core, I always was playing like the snare. I was and then, over time became the lead stick. So I was like I should probably take band, but after gunnery, I just knew that wasn't going to be
Mm.
the way I went. And yeah, and actually I quit shortly after that too
Uh,
because yeah, so it was one of those things that it just worked out. But in where I was from, I was a small town in Sylvan Lake, and the bus would leave CFB Penhold and would stop in Innisfail and pick up all the farm kids and stop in Sylvan Lake, and we'd go out to the Red Deer Armory. And in those days, there weren't anything for women at all,
yeah.
like nothing. And, I didn't play hockey, so there was nothing. So that my friend was like, why don't you come? And so I did. And that's how I ended up being a part of it. If it wasn't for that bus that was leaving Penhold and going across, I probably never would have been in cadets. But then I had another friend who, her parents were in, the forces and such. So she became the first, I think, female commander of a ship ever, and she came from Red Deer. And yeah, that's like we have folks that
That's a
continued
prairie
on.
sailor.
Yeah. Everybody made fun of us, but like Sylvan Lake was fun to sail on, and I learned how to sail at Sylvan Lake. And at Quadra, that was where we did like overnights on actual ships and jumped the jetty and swam in the
Yeah.
ocean. Like it was fun.
Yeah. It was a good experience.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I loved it. I'm so glad. And um, oh, that's right. And we were talking about the scholarship
Actually,
too. Yeah.
I'm actually the second generation. My kids are the third generation to have gone to Quadra.
Oh my God.
My
My God.
father and his first cousin were actually the second year that Quadra was open in 1953.
What?
Yeah.
Holy, holy. That's
They're from Battleford. They're from the reserve. They
wow.
had a Sea Cadet Corps in Battleford that only lasted until the 70s. And then, they were like, off you go to this base.
That's so funny. And really, because you're from Winnipeg, um, in Sylvan Lake and Red Deer, we had like two factions. We had the Sea Cadets that went to Quadra, and we had the Sea Cadets that went to Gimli to really learn how to be real sailors, right?
Yeah,
And
of
they
course.
never wore uniforms or nothing, and you were right there. Did you ever sail much?
No, just the sale weekends or whatever they provided for the band. But the band was mostly marching around and going to Victoria and Nanaimo and up and down the Vancouver Island, which was like I've played for the Queen like I think 5 times or something. And saw her all the
Unbelievable.
time. Like, oh yeah, I'm gonna play for the Queen again. Yeah, 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 no problem, no problem.
That's so funny. I remember my favorite memory of Quadra. It was in '92 when we were taking gunnery and we were doing the ceremony of the flags in Victoria. And we had practiced with the three field guns to do the 1812 overture. And we did it. And we were like one of the first ones to not have a misfire, anything. I have a scar permanently because of it, actually, but it was worth it, right? Like it was a fun moment. And whenever I hear the 1812 overture, all I think of is guns going off.
That is very cool. I was always jealous I never had the chance to do that. I was just sitting there, listen. Well, because that was the symphony that was playing, and you were
hmm
helping out with the symphony, so we were just watching that. So you were the lucky one. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, gotta
But
sit
you
there
know
and
what? You
listen.
can't hear it. You can't hear it at the time. Like all you can hear is guns going off, and so it's just like. And when I say guns to folks who are listening, like I'm not talking about rifles or handguns. I'm talking about field guns, which are cannons. Some people call them cannons, but we never use that terminology. So you had like the three cannons in a row, and they were going off. So the last thing you could hear is the symphony. It was just that the folks who were telling us when to shoot and when I was pulling out the shells, that was my job was to pull out the shell. So
Hot shells,
yeah,
hot
yeah,
shells,
that's why I have a
burning
scar.
your little fingers. Ah, my fingers.
They have this really cool clamp, and you just grabbed it and threw it, and that like there was six of us, and we all had one little job to do in order to do it, and we just went as fast as we possibly could, and we were the first one to not have a misfire, and it just worked. It was
Yeah.
awesome. I wish there was a videotape of that. Anyway.
I'm sure
So
there are people who made lots of videos of those ceremonies.
yeah, they're out there, but it was in the '90s, so it's a little different because like in
You
those
gotta you
days,
gotta you gotta hunt it down.
yeah, like it's a CD somewhere in a thrift shop in I don't know, Nowheresville bin. So
Waiting
anyway,
for
anyway.
someone like us to come along. Oh, look at this.
Right? And actually,
And the
it's funny.
our kids will be like, we don't care.
Yeah, no one cares. But and that's the funny thing is that you guys are doing these drum groups now, and like it's very healing. And it's interesting how I was doing the drum and not understanding why. And those Satudene women aren't supposed to drum, but I've always found my way around a drum. Always. It's
Mm.
my dad was a drummer, and so I've always been surrounded by drums. And anyway, it's just funny that you guys are doing this. Like these are historical things that you are doing as well as spiritual.
Yeah, well, it's for me, it's actually quite important. It's like, if I don't know, it's a calling. To be honest, I don't know why my life keeps leading me here, uh,
I know.
but it's just I think for a long time, members of our families weren't allowed to do these things, and for me, it's a connection to the spirits.
Yeah.
Like in 2017, when I was an MP, actually, I was on the finance committee And I was feeling, it was quite a tough period to be on the finance committee because they were, it's very serious. And, the people, to be honest, weren't, not the nicest on the finance committee because it's, they all want to see their careers advance and they want to be the best and they want to be a minister. And yet, I'm there and I'm like, well, I'm, I'm on the finance committee. I'm the first First Nations person, first
Yeah.
Indigenous person ever to be on the finance committee in Canadian history. And I was like, well, I'm gonna, I'm here to make sure we tilt the balance a little bit, like
Mm.
talk about other issues, talk about people who don't get to be heard at the finance committee.
Yeah.
And I found it really stressful because for an entire year I was the only one asking about Indigenous peoples on this committee ever.
Yeah.
And and eventually, it was we were had the Christmas break, and I was like, you know what, I want to connect with my people more. I feel disconnected from who I am,
Yeah.
and so I decided to go back to my home community and walk back to Winnipeg and walk through the traditional territories of the Cree people and Dakota and Ishnabeg people. And so I walked about over the course of more than almost a month, 900 kilometers. And I remember, you know, uh, when we drive on the prairies, people often think the prairies, you go by very quickly, they think it's empty. But
Yeah.
when you walk on the prairies,
Yeah.
it's actually a very, very busy place.
Yeah.
There might not be a car around
Yeah.
where I was walking, but there are many spirits and you can
Mm.
actually feel it. You see like something and you say, there's something here. There's animals, there's birds, there's the wind. I was never alone. It was actually it was quite good. I think it drove my colleagues though in Ottawa crazy because they're like, what are you doing? When are you coming back? What does this mean? And for me, I got to see 41 First Nation communities, visit with them, hear their stories, see what was going on, and then get back to Ottawa and say, well, like I heard on the ground, you say we're doing this and this and this, and apparently we're not.
Yeah.
There's schools with black mold in it. There's communities that have no housing. There are communities that are getting housing, but this community has no housing. Why is that?
Yeah.
Well, because they haven't filled out the applications. Well, help them fill out the application then.
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's
It,
inexcusable anymore.
yeah, yeah. No, it
I
was good.
I'm really glad that you shared that with me because that's tough, a really tough thing to do. Did you have your military backpack and you just did it?
Well, actually, I have a friend. He's Palestinian. He's in charge of the Peerless Garments, which is a garment factory, and they make military uniforms. And he had a one of those red jackets for the Coast Guard as a sample. And I went to see him, and I said, "I'm going on this walk, and I don't have, I need some gear." I had my military gear, but he said, "Oh, I've got all this nice Arctic gear." So minus, it's like I was bundled up and I was comfortable and um and I left and I actually had no one to drive me as like to follow in a van
Yeah.
because it gets dark and I don't want to be on the highway in the middle of the winter walking along the highway. So I was in Battleford and I'm talking to my a cousin of mine, like a third cousin. And I was visiting an old aunt and she comes in and I'm like, "Oh, I'm going on this walk." She says, "Oh, really?" Like, like I'm not doing anything right now. I'll okay. I'll maybe I can does it pay any money? Yeah, I could pay you a bit of money, like like help out. I've rented a van. I just need a driver, for maybe a month. So she actually drove. She would say, I'll be back in a couple hours. I'm gonna go and chill out, and I'll come back to visit you and see how you're doing. If you got a problem, text me on your cell phone." And so it was. She traveled along, and actually, even for her, even just driving
Yeah.
uh, for her, it was actually a very spiritual connection as well because she'd been in Battleford. She was kind of stuck in a life that she maybe didn't want, And afterwards, we were done, and I brought her to Ottawa, and she said, "This is too much. This is too out of my league." But she went back to Battleford, and about 6 months later, she moved to Kelowna.
Mm.
And she moved to Kelowna. She met a nice guy. They got married, and she had children.
Oh,
And she wouldn't have, I don't think she would have done that if she had not come on this drive and walk. She drove, I walked. But because, I'd walk for like 30 Ks during the day, and then she would come where I am, pick me up, and we go to a hotel somewhere, and then we go back the next day to come to that same spot and, finish it off the next, till we meet the next location. A lot of work, tough, but fun.
I'm really glad that you did that. I had a good friend who used to do that. He walked Canada 3 times for different
Oh,
reasons. Yeah. And honestly, it is a real journey. And my husband walked with him for a small period of it. And we have a lot of families that do a lot of walking, especially in Alberta, to try to raise awareness about missing and murdered Indigenous women,
it's
girls, and
there's
Two-Spirit.
actually
So yeah,
walking is actually I actually think it's very indigenous. Murray
yeah,
Sinclair's wife, Catherine
mm,
Sinclair, actually did a water walk from northern or Lake Winnipeg
yeah,
all the way down to Winnipeg, talking about the importance of protecting Lake Winnipeg. And she did that in 2014, I think, for,
incredible.
but and then Michelle Audette did a March Amun, walking from Quebec City to Ottawa, talking about the Indian Act
Yeah,
and talking about the discrimination towards Indigenous women, their children, this idea of first class, second class, and third class uh, Indians,
yeah,
Indigenous peoples that we have under the Indian Act,
yeah,
because you have someone who's 100% technically under the law, you have someone who's now 50%, their children, and then you have these people, all the grandchildren that have no status at all
yeah,
and become alienated from their own identity and from who they are.
yes.
And they, become. Um, I was actually surprised. People were all upset about Donald Trump and the idea of birthright, where you're born on a territory and you become a citizen automatically. And I said, well, Indigenous peoples, we're born on our traditional lands and we have no birthright.
Right. Right. And I was trying to talk about it, trying to bring it up on my socials, but like, as you know, we just are suppressed with our message. So I
Mm,
really appreciate you sharing that here too. I really appreciate that because I just feel like that conversation is missing. And watching the leadership debate has been very disheartening to hear
mm.
no talk about the continued work that we need to do with reconciliation, that being our,
Oh, I've got the current leader, liberal one.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, very disappointing to hear the lack of commitment to reconciliation. And I hope I'm wrong, and I'm hoping on the budget it'll show up, but we shall see.
Well, maybe it's something that everyone should do is try and get rid of the Indian Act.
Mm,
Why do we still have the Indian Act? Why
you
in
know,
1876 and we're still living with this legislation? Like, what is this?
I know it's the most discriminatory piece, and it's still there. Like I tell people, if I told you there was a Black Act or a Jew Act, you'd all be upset. But we have an Indian Act, and you're all cool with that, right? And it's, when you say it like that, it usually hits people a lot harder. So I respectfully understand what you're saying.
That's actually I've never heard that expression. Imagine if we had a Black Act.
Yeah, or a Jew Act. A lot of people would be very rightfully upset at that
Hmm.
discrimination. But in Canada, it's so normalized to have the Indian Act.
Yeah, no one bats an eye.
No one. So I really appreciate this conversation you had with us. I wish you so much love and luck with that. I think it's really important for me to say this to any other Indigenous listening or to folks who believe in prayer who are maybe settlers listening. One of the things that I do when I pray is I always pray for our leaders. I pray whether we're talking about, the Sinclairs, whether we're talking yourself, whether we're talking
Hmm.
about Michelle Audette. I always pray for our leaders and for our elders because they are giving so much. And you being in the position that you were in as an MP, you being in a position that you're in now, while you're the first, you're often probably alone. And I always pray for
Hmm.
strength for you in those moments because um, while you are never alone, as you said so eloquently in your walk, that the spirits are always with us, I think that bigger picture of always trying to give you that strength. And we had a Calgary firefighter who passed here for the same reason, a discrimination he was facing, and he
Mm.
decided he couldn't take that no longer, and rightfully, reached out to elders and tried, but just ultimately decided that was the best route for him. And I think about him a lot that I
Yeah.
should have been praying sooner for him. And
Mm.
but bigger picture that we all need to pray for our leaders. And even during Idle No More, a lot of the elders here told me the reason why they gave headdresses to Stephen Harper was so that they'd have a way to pray to him and his soul, and that ancestors were sent over to him to try to talk to him, and he wasn't open to hearing them. But I think about that I pray for non-Indigenous leaders too. I was praying for Dina Hinshaw here in Alberta. I grew up with her, but that bigger picture is that I knew she was under so
Wow.
much pressure, right? And continued pressure. I think of an Esther Tailfeathers who does the harm reduction programming out at the Blood Tribe. And I think of her and people like her in all of the communities all across this country. So, these are people who I pray for. So know that you are in my thoughts and my prayers as I pray.
I hope.
It's not a thoughts and prayers. It's meaningful.
Yeah, no, I think it actually is. And
Yeah,
sometimes people like things can be sent, good messages. It's good medicine.
yeah,
When we do the smudge and we clear our minds and our ears and the words that we have in our hearts and we clear our body and we take a moment to reflect, though, those little ceremonies are very important because it actually recenters us on who we are as people,
yes,
as humans, as part of creation. And in Western society, I think we're so alienated. So many people are alienated from their natural selves about who they are. They're told to turn that part off, to be focused on just forget about the rest, just focus on this one little part. But in fact, actually, when we say all my relations, it's all of creation. You can't
yes,
isolate yourself. You can't sit there and say, "Oh, that spiritual part of me does not exist. The connection to my ancestors does not exist." You have to enter into conversation with it,
yeah,
and because if you don't, at some point, it's going to come back to bite you,
yeah,
and you'll get sick.
yeah,
People get sick. That's why there's a lot of sickness. It's not just it's not just the food we eat, but it's also the spiritual mind,
yeah.
uh, and what we're doing with our soul.
Agreed. Oh, I love this conversation, Robert. I can't wait to talk to you more. Know that we're thinking about you
Okay,
and sending you all the good love and light. And you're welcome to stay as I do my exit. But I just can't thank you enough for your time that you took for me today. Thank you.
me takoyaki ki tuam. Hai, hai.
Mm. Mm. Oh, I'm so happy we had him come to the show today. On Monday is book club. We're going to be doing our February book selection, which is the Senate report on anti-Black racism. I really am looking forward to discussing that. So I hope you catch that. We just released January's book club on the podcast. I hope you caught that and enjoyed it as well, about reflections on allyship. So I guess January's will be a tougher one because it's Sites of Truth. And I encourage everyone to listen to that. That's a continued report about Volume 4 of the Missing Children and Unmarked Graves. Very difficult conversations. There's still parts of it haunting me. And I want to give a shout out to Arc of the Medicine Line, which is our November book club, which talks about US and Canada, more of the British survey work on the border because we're having those conversations today in real life. Anyway, bossy to my ancestors, to my granny, my mom, what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian roots and family, and stepping up to be my stepmom and teaching me how to be a proud Calgarian. It's through her. I'm second generation. My husband, he has produced and edited this show. He's been my husband, my childhood friend, My father of the child we have, I have always had his love and support down my journey of life, and he has witnessed decades of racism, sexism, ableism. To our child, we are blessed to learn from you daily and honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I hope my daughter and my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they can understand down the road. I honor the Blackfoot, as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to say it in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to all the language keepers and elders as I try to learn. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And the last thing I like to talk about is, these touch grass moments where we talk about a lot of dark, dark things on media and social media. But just to remember that our world is filled with joy and happiness, and that is a part of that radical love and joy of revolution against this capitalist colonial system. So I will always enjoy hearing your stories as well as sharing with mine. And I just want to give a shout out to Wob Canoe for being a social media darling. He has been a so much in the forefront with this conversation of Team Canada. And he said, spend all your money in Canada for travel. And then he had the audacity to claim that the Jets are going to win the cup, so that you better go to Winnipeg. I just know so many Canadians are falling in love with him, and that makes me so happy. So I just wanted to throw out that as a good feeling for today, and know that no matter what, there's always joy around you, and that you got to look for it and you got to acknowledge it and maybe give a little thanks to it. Like we were talking earlier about the importance of positive prayer and giving strength to people that matter. Anyway, thanks for listening, folks. I appreciate you. As always, I end with side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not tradish. My beautiful cousin responded, or you'd be in my dish. Thanks, folks, for listening.